A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards, and I'm glad that you were with us on the program today. Apologies, by the way, for Friday. Had some unforeseen circumstances pop up. Talked about it a little bit online. My wife, who has been dealing with lung cancer for about 4.5 years now, just was not feeling good. The latest treatment that she's on was just really kind of kicking her butt, so we had to end up going to the hospital. Good news is she's feeling better. Fingers crossed and prayers up that she's able to continue on with this course of treatment. But I do appreciate all those who reached out and let me know that you were thinking about it and that you were praying for her. Thank you very, very much. Now, on the program today, we've got Jon Stokes joining us. He is the editor of The Prepared. We're going to talk about what is going on in this country. And I got to tell you, we could talk for 5 hours about everything that is going on since we last had a show on Thursday. The deplatforming of conservatives on Twitter, the deplatforming of the president on virtually all social media accounts. The push for new gun control laws that we're seeing here, the crackdown on free speech, the plans for expansion of things like the Patriot Act. We're in a very troubling time here. But one thing that stretches no matter where you stand on the political spectrum. And by the way, it's not that there are just now two parties in this country. I firmly believe that the party system is probably not going to survive in its current form in the next couple of years on both the left and the right. So no matter where you stand in the political spectrum, I want you to be safe. I want your family to be safe during these uncertain times. So we're going to get into the politics this week. But today, I want to talk about being prepared in this time of uncertainty. Americans, we're doing a pretty good job, I think, at least many of us are, of ensuring that we can protect ourselves and our families. We once again saw huge lines outside of gun stores this weekend, the type of lines that we saw back in March, like the first weekend that those lockdown orders went into effect. We saw that again in Utah, Los Angeles, Alabama, everywhere. Chances are, if there's a gun store near you, it had one of the busiest days in history. Saw a quote from a gun store owner in Alabama. He says, generally on a Saturday, they'll do $18,000 to $20,000 worth of business. He said they did $45,000 worth of business. Now keep in mind, $18,000 to $20,000 worth of business over the last year or so, that's already factoring in an increase in sales. We just went through a record-setting year in terms of gun sales. And this past weekend, sales were double what they normally were, at least for this gentleman down in Alabama. But it's more than just ensuring that you have a firearm, that you have ammunition that you can use to protect yourself and your family. That is a critically important part of being prepared, but it is not the only step that you can take. So join us to talk about what you can do and where we might be headed here. Very pleased that the editor of theprepared.com, Jon Stokes, could join us today and spend some time with us. Take a look and a listen. Hey, Jon, thanks so much for coming on the show, sir. It's good talking with you today.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we, it's amazing. I was just thinking as I was getting ready to talk to you this morning about our first conversation last March. After the lockdowns ensued, we saw the huge lines of folks outside of gun stores. I knew we were in for a crazy year. I did not think that we would be here, unfortunately, but here we are. So I'm curious, man, just to get your take. Where do you think we're headed here in the next couple of? Let's stick with the next, say, month. Where do you think this country is headed over the next 4 weeks?
I guess the way that I respond to that is to say that the space of possibilities has gotten wider than it normally is. There's just a big range. And so it's really hard. I tend not to like to make concrete projections, but I just think in terms of scenarios. And, in general, for me, there's a couple of interlocking things. One is the pandemic. Is quite serious. The hospital overwhelm is quite serious. We are maybe at 25% total infected across the country. A lot of regions have fewer. Some regions maybe have a little bit more, some hot spots. But max, I think, a quarter of people have had this or have it right now currently. And that means that, we got 75% left to run. And in the regime of exponential growth, that's going to be, it's going to come faster than you think. So there's the pandemic piece. You still there? It looks like frozen up a little bit.
Yeah,
so there's the pandemic piece, and loss of access to like hospital. There's going to be knock-on effects on supply chain. So I'm hearing more rumors of aluminum, CO2 type shortages. So canned goods, soft drinks, that stuff may start to thin out. There was a wave of supply destruction in the beginning of the lockdowns. A lot of hogs culled, milk dump, soybeans. We interviewed supply chain experts at universities and ag guys, and they told us that material that was destroyed in March would be hitting the market in January and February of 2021. So now, and so that we would not feel the supply chain crunch until like right about now. So if you see some prices go up, you see some things getting scarce, it's that dumping that you saw back in the middle of the pandemic. So you got supply chain things going on that are starting to kind of take hold. You've got the pandemic stuff taking hold, and of course the political situation, and so all this stuff is really volatile. And for me, because you don't know what's going to pop off and where, to sort of transition to the preparedness part, a lot of what you really need to think about are just comms and situational awareness, radio, staying in touch with people, not putting too much stock in rumors, but trying to stay informed. That doesn't necessarily mean believe everything that comes across your Facebook feed.
Right.
You should probably take most of that with a grain of salt. But in terms of your local area, you got to know what's happening, what's going on, and, be able to keep your head down.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, you just laid out some of the stressors that are on this country right now and on individual Americans. And you look at everything from the rise in suicides, the staggering increase in drug overdose deaths over the past 9 months or so, increase in violent crime in many places around the country. All of those things are additional stressors related to what you just described: the political environment, the COVID environment, the lockdowns, the supply chain issues. I think, and I'm an optimistic guy, but I think people do really need to take this seriously. We are sort of in uncharted waters as far as certainly any of us alive today. We've never seen our country go through this many stresses at the same time, have this many fractures at the same time. And so, I think it's important that people understand this is not business as usual right now.
Yeah, you can't, this is a complex system, and you can't just dismantle big chunks of it, like social gatherings, parts of the economy and jobs and, political support, healthcare system, access to emergency rooms, and expect things to just kind of bump along. That means that you may have a breakdown in one part that throws an error or a problem in another. A good example was the CO2 shortage that resulted in early on a shortage of like canned soft drinks, and then also water purification materials, because that's an input into that system. So you have these two weird things, which is like municipal water and Coca-Cola, both affected by like a CO2 shortage, like somewhere back up in the supply chain. So my point being that, things are gonna pop up, and they're gonna come up, and they're gonna be weird and unexpected. It's going to be because something, 5 steps up in the system, there was a domino effect. And so all of this is stuff to be aware of and stuff to think about, and people should mostly, the way I think of preparedness in a lot of cases is maintaining your options. So you really want to focus on things that give you options. And so food, water, that stuff gives you optionality, but also having gas on hand gives you optionality to be able to leave, if you want. I really wouldn't have less than, 3/4 of a tank right now. I'd have fuel on my property. Because you don't know when a gas line is going to emerge because of some panic. So I think in general, people should stay on top of their preps, stay on top of their stockpiles, and also just kind of stay connected, stay plugged in. If you're not a radio person, you're just an internet person, maybe figure out what the local emergency radio is and stay tuned in. You don't have to go out and get a ham certification, but just keep your communication options open.
What advice would you give elected officials, either at the national level or at the state level or even local level, about how to maybe de-escalate things? Try to start to calm things down. Not just the words that they would say, because I don't know that people are going to listen to just words. But what concrete steps could elected officials be taking right now to try to alleviate some of these concerns and the fear that a lot of Americans face, whether, again, it's the loss of a job or whether it's, the fear of, 75 million Americans being silenced or targeted as others right now?
Yeah, this is really difficult. I certainly am extremely alarmed at the deplatformings and just the thoroughness of it. And even some of my friends on the left are very alarmed. I think there are certainly people on the left that cheer this, but I think it's very stupid to cheer this. I can see sort of hand wringing and regrettably saying, well, I believe there was an emergency, something had to be done, whatever. That's an argument that we can have, but I think cheering it is really dumb. So don't cheer the deplatformings would be one. If you have to talk about it, talk about how bad this is and how something has to be fixed. And, this is maybe an emergency measure, but it's not sustainable or whatever other kind of messaging. I think people are in a very precarious situation economically. People need help. They need access to money. They need support. I know it's controversial, these checks and stuff, but I personally am a fan of the checks. I'm like, give people some checks right now, and we'll figure this out later because they need support. The vaccine, all of this prioritization and stuff, don't let these doses go to waste. Just say we're going to commit to get vaccines in people's arms if they want them. So everybody that wants a vaccine can get it. And if you jump the line, who cares? So that's I think is a concrete step. So I think there are things like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like what you're describing are nuts and bolts, right? Things that on the left and the right, we need government to be able to function. And there are a lot of folks, again, on the left and the right, who say that the government is not functioning right now. And you can look at, the vaccine, I think, is a perfect example of this. You've got states that are basically left up to deciding how these vaccines are going to be distributed. I saw a headline out of New York today where, there are hospitals who are being fined for giving vaccines out of order. And yet you've got other hospitals that are having to throw away vaccines because they don't have enough people in, stage 1A or whatever coming in to get the vaccines. That's ridiculous. And again, it exacerbates the problem. I think it's actually really wise advice to tell elected officials, focus on the nuts and bolts of government, focusing on the basics here. But I'll be honest with you, John. I don't know. We could have said that for years, right? Focus on the nuts and bolts. I don't know that government does that all that well these days. It seems like the politics is more important than the actual policies that matter to individual Americans in many cases.
Yeah, there's just such a big push right now. People are angry, and I see amongst my friends on the left this really strong desire. I don't want to get into was it a coup or anything like this, but it's like, okay, let's take your premises. You think that there was an attempted violent coup and, all this other kind of stuff. Why don't you take the approach that you take with the riots and say, let's look at root causes. Let's look at people's insecurity. Let's look at the fact that they have been told to shelter in place. Let's look at the fact that they are, in some cases, worried about their jobs. Let's focus on the root causes as a matter of emergency and not focus on rounding up people and, pushing trials and all this other kind of business. That's my feeling on this is whatever it is that you think happened and however bad you think it is, we can at least all agree that there's an economic emergency, that there's a pandemic emergency, and that is driving a lot of what we've seen. I mean, I personally certainly believe that the summer protests would not have been close to what they were if it would not have been for the pandemic. The same thing with the 6th, what happened on January the 6th. We would not have seen anything like that if we had not seen the pandemic and the lockdowns. But, everybody wants to apportion blame for this and that and say, blame whiteness or whatever kind of thing. I mean, look, we have to talk about root causes and the fact that we are now closing in on 500,000 dead, at some point in the next couple of weeks. And that doesn't count excess deaths. At the Prepared, we have some medical experts and some bioinformatic guys. And early on in this pandemic, we looked at a lot of the studies coming out of Italy and Iran and China. And in every place where this virus was allowed to overwhelm the local healthcare system, excess mortality was 5 to 6x. And so excess mortality is the deaths that happened because you couldn't get to the hospital, heart attacks, stabbings, gunshots, and triage type deaths because the system was overwhelmed. And those exceeded the COVID deaths by 5 or 6, by a multiple of 5 or 6. So in these areas where there is a lot of hospital overwhelm, there will be a lot of deaths. And we have this issue here. I personally know people in Texas who have had loved ones that have passed, and the cremation and the morgue thing is like it's backed up. It's backed up for like weeks and weeks and weeks because there are enough bodies now that the system is starting to choke. So these are all root causes that you got to tackle before we get into blame this, blame that. But I got to tell you, this stuff isn't over. We're still in the middle of it. And the stuff that we saw on 1/6, I think that was that was the appetizer. I really think we're going to see more at the state houses soon. We may see more again in DC. And we're going to see different kind of one-off things and other kind of, violence and other kind of business. And in countries where that happens, like Sri Lanka, or even take the United States. We had like a full-blown civil war, right? But the stock market still traded through most of it. You could still get the mail in a lot of cases, and there was still a fair amount of course, infrastructure was in a different state back then. But this happens, Northern Ireland, Sri Lanka. People still go to the grocery store. They still get deliveries. There is still a supply chain. There is still a stock market. And you just sort of move about in the midst of this. And then, you find there was an explosion at the courthouse or there was an attack somewhere or whatever. And I feel like that's the kind of state that we may find ourselves in 2021. I hope not, but I think that that's a possibility.
Yeah, I'm with you. And folks who are watching might disagree with me, but I don't think that we're going to see in the short term anyway the dissolution of the United States. I don't think we're going to see states declare that they're independent nations. We're not there yet, and hopefully we never get to that point. But yesterday, I don't know, did you ever read the book Days of Rage by Brian Burroughs, I think was the author's name. It was about the 1970s. It was about what happened after the sort of the idealism of the 1960s collapsed, and it followed the Weather Underground and the SLA and the other, sort of revolutionary groups. And yesterday I just kept thinking, are we going back to 1970s 2.0? Is that what we're going to see here? This sort of, people forget, but I mean, there were in the early 1970s, there was a bombing a day, if not more. Now, these were not bombs that were necessarily meant to take human lives, but this was a sustained campaign that lasted for years. And you had a number of these little splinter groups that you read about this today, and it sounds so foreign to those of us who grew up in the 80s or 90s when it was a much more peaceful time. But I could see something like that happening very easily, where you've got these, marginalized and radicalized groups across the political spectrum that decide to, wage these types of campaigns against civil society and against our institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally think along the model of a return to the 70s, there's an essay that Rick Perlstein, is a historian, wrote, and I'll have to find it and send it to you, but I can't remember the title right now. But it's about there's a quick summary of how many bombings there were in the 70s and how many politicians were shot and how many attempts there were on lives of the president and so on and so forth. This was a thing, and people got on. We didn't have social media amping us all up. And so this is I think, going to be the difference if and when that returns, if and when we are seeing, bombings of the kind we just saw in Nashville on a more regular basis, attempts on the lives of public figures. People are now plugged into Facebook and Twitter. And that changes the game. That amplifies a lot of the sense of fear and alert and alarm in a way that wasn't possible in an era when this was a thing that happened on the news. And you got your news in the space of 30 minutes every evening and possibly a newspaper in the morning that you read with coffee. And then you went on to your job, and you weren't just plugged in, you weren't doom scrolling. But if the entire country is doom scrolling, and we have a 70s style, I've heard a Palestinian friend call it an intifada. If we have something like that, then that's gonna change, the mind space that people occupy. And many of these things in the 70s, we did not have a pandemic. And we didn't have, so not only did we not have smartphones, we didn't have social media, we didn't have a pandemic. So these things are going to intersect and feed back on each other in weird ways that will be worth watching.
So in terms of being prepared, obviously you talked about, look, have 3/4 of a tank of gas in your car, have some gas at home, 2 weeks supply of food and water. But I'm curious. I mean, you brought up social media. Do you think people should be limiting their time online right now to prepare themselves to sort of strengthen their own mental health at this point, rather than doom scrolling for hours through your social media feeds?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, one thing I do, I've got friends that I know are online, and I know that they will signal me if something insane happens. And, I know I'm not going to miss anything because I'm connected to enough people, and I can be like, okay, I'm going to force myself to take a bit of a fast on this stuff. And I know that if something pops off, I will get an alert, from a buddy. And that's a thing that people can and should do, either formally or informally. Be like, look, man, I'm going to take, a day off of social media and decompress. And if something really crazy happens, give me a call. It'll be good to hear a voice. If you can't call me, shoot me a text or something, and I'll go on and look. People are spending too much time with this stuff. Just last Sunday, our pastor, the past 2 Sundays, my pastor has tried to encourage all of us to just get off. He's like, get off social media and just tune in on the 21st and see what happens. And I think this is good advice. I've got to be on there for my job. You've got to be on there for your job. If you don't have to be on there, then maybe let somebody else in your network take a shift.
Yeah. Well, look, and I can tell you, I mean, even, yes, I have to be online for my job, but I don't spend my entire day scrolling through my Twitter feed. And at night, in the evenings, when I'm done with work, I make sure I block off time. We've got my wife and I have TV time. So we've got an hour and a half where we're going to watch a show together. I try to give myself an hour every night to just read a book. Right. Not just, read bite-sized little snippets of information and opinion online, but to actually sit down with an honest to goodness physical book and just read long form, whether it's history, sometimes it's fiction. Most of the time it's not. It's nonfiction, but it still is just a way to, provide that little bit of separation, just that respite. It doesn't stop the outside world from continuing on, but it does give me a chance to sort of mentally recharge my batteries. And I think that's really important because, look, I mean, I don't care what your situation is. I don't care if you're lucky enough to have held on to your job over the past year, your finances are secure. Every one of us, I think, is feeling the stress of what is, going to go down as one of the most stressful years, not just in U.S. history, but I think in world history in the last 100 years. We're living it. It's okay to acknowledge that we are living through a stressful time and that we're all sort of feeling it. And we all need to take the steps we can to be as prepared as possible for, whatever unforeseen circumstances might be coming our way in 2021. Jon Stokes, theprepared.com is where folks can find you. Lots of fantastic information on how to keep safe and secure. Thank you so much for your time today, sir, and look forward to doing this again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I do appreciate John joining us on the program. Now, listen, before we get to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, our recidivist report, I really don't want to get into the politics too deeply today, but I will say along these same lines of steps that you can take to be prepared, things that you can do. John had a lot of great ideas. I will add one more to them, and that is get involved. Get involved. Particularly in your local, I don't even want to say political party, but just get involved locally. I've seen so many folks over the past few days say, the time for politics is done. It's not. It never is. It never is. There is never going to be a time when politics doesn't come into play. Even in 1776, for God's sakes, we still had elections. You still had local elections. You still had elections to the Continental Congress. As John mentioned, during the Civil War, not only did you still have mail delivery, you still had folks going to back then it probably wasn't the grocery store, the general store. You still had goods being delivered, but you also had an election in 1862. You had an election in 1864. Politics is never going to be unimportant unless we get to, Mad Max. If we get there, okay, then you can quit paying attention to politics. But until then, we're going to have local governments. We're going to have state governments. We are going to have Congress. We are going to have a federal presidential administration. These things are not going to disappear and they don't become unimportant. In fact, I would argue that particularly when our rights are threatened by one level of government, it becomes incumbent on us to become more involved in those other layers of government. So if you haven't been to your county supervisor's meeting or your city hall meeting, for your city council, go. You might have to go online right now, but go. Be a part of these things. Be involved. Be engaged. Because I think that is a much better path forward than simply throwing up your hands in disgust, saying, forget it. Politics is so irrevocably broken, there's no point in me even being involved anymore. Politics is pretty broken. I won't deny it. But it doesn't disappear. It doesn't become less important. And in troubled times, again, your local governments, your state governments can serve as a lifeline. We'll be talking again a lot more about that in the days to come. But I hope that despite the uncertainty, despite the unrest and the COVID closures and every other stressor that we just talked about, I hope that you and yours will be safe. in the days and weeks ahead. All right, so let's turn our attention. It's been a little while. It's been a minute since we've gotten to our good deed of the day, our armed citizen story, our recidivist report, but we will do so now. Starting with our recidivist report story, headline out of Chicago, Illinois over the weekend, where a man ended up shooting a number of people randomly, apparently, over a period of several hours. 3 people dead, 4 wounded, and officials say that this guy posted several videos, not just in the hours before these shootings happened, but apparently in the weeks before. 32-year-old Jason Nightingale, police say, apparently chose his victims at random. He was killed in a shootout just north of Chicago about 4 hours after authorities say he shot his first victim at a parking garage on the south side of the city of Chicago. 30-year-old Yiren Fan, a University of Chicago student from China, 20-year-old Anthony Falker, 46-year-old Aisha Neville, all killed by Mr. Nightingale. A 77-year-old woman, an 80-year-old woman wounded by Nightingale. A 15-year-old girl wounded as well. Another woman shot in the neck in Evanston, Illinois. Now, the Washington Post says authorities didn't release many details about Nightingale, a Chicago man who worked apparently in recent years as a janitor, security guard, and forklift operator. But disturbing videos, they say, posted to Facebook over 2 years under Nightingale's middle name Oliver offered clues about his state of mind. In one posted on Thursday, Nightingale held a gun to the camera, muttered unintelligible statements as he appeared to be driving. Said in the video, quote, "No music, no music. I don't need no seatbelt. I'm coming, girl." Posted dozens of these short videos, apparently. One, he said, "I'm going to blow up the whole community." Now, according to authorities, Chicago police was taken into custody back in October of 2019 on multiple driving-related offenses, including driving on a suspended license. But his criminal record actually goes back to 2005 and includes arrests for both gun and drug violations, aggravated assault, domestic battery in 2019. Mr. Nightingale was not a legal gun owner. It looks like, based on his criminal history, he was a prohibited person. Again, you kind of have to wonder, all right, so given this guy's record that goes back to 2005, what, if any, punishment did he receive? What, if any, treatment did he receive? Were there any, mental issues that appeared in some of these more recent cases back in 2018, back in 2019? Was there any sign that, maybe this guy didn't just need time behind bars, but he also needed a little help upstairs as well? And was any help even offered? Kind of sounds like the answer to that is no, but we'll keep our eyes on this story and give you more developments in the days to come. Today's armed citizen story from Miami, Oklahoma, not Miami. Don't say it that way. They don't like it when you do that. Miami, Oklahoma, where an intruder was killed by a homeowner armed with a shotgun at a Miami residence there. According to the police chief in Miami, Chief Thomas Anderson, 30-year-old Roger Nellums died around 1 a.m. Friday. He had been released from the Ottawa County Jail on Tuesday. Yeah, just a couple of days earlier, released from the Ottawa County Jail on charges of knowingly receiving or concealing stolen property, as well as false declaration of ownership and pawn. So basically, he stole stuff, allegedly, and then pawned it. Burglary in progress reported in Miami around 12:16 in the morning. Resident told police he shot the person who broke into his home. Caller told police that he was in his living room when a man began banging on the back door. He said he armed himself with a shotgun after he heard somebody climb through the window of a back bedroom. He told police he fired once at the man, identified as Nellums, after the intruder approached the resident. Nellums taken to a local hospital where he was pronounced deceased. Online court records show that 12 warrants had been issued for Nellums in Ottawa County in cases dealing with child abuse, violating a protective order, domestic assault and battery, burglary of an automobile, larceny, drug violations, concealing stolen property, and threatening acts of violence. The police chief there in Miami says no charges are expected against the homeowner who acted in self-defense. And finally, today, we've got our good deed of the day from Wilmington, North Carolina, where a police officer credited with saving the life of a child during a medical emergency. Officer Mizrahi with the Wilmington Police Department was nearby. It was a week ago today when a 10-year-old girl went into cardiac arrest, according to a release from the Wilmington PD. Yeah, 10 years old. Police dispatched within 90 seconds. Officer Mizrahi was on scene and performing CPR on the young girl. Wilmington Fire and EMS units arrived 2 minutes later. They were able to regain a pulse on the young girl. She was transported to a local hospital where she is currently recovering. And paramedics say that they credit Officer Mizrazi's quick action to begin medical assistance with saving the young girl's life. So in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. Officer Mizrazi with the Wilmington, North Carolina Police Department, we thank you very much for your very good deed. That is all the time we've got for you on this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I do want to thank you for being a part of the program as well. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the latest Second Amendment news and information. Make sure as well, by the way, that you're following along at bearingarms.com, where we've got updates on the potential for gun control legislation in Congress, as well as what some states are doing to try to restrict the right to keep and bear arms, as well as efforts in states to expand and protect our Second Amendment rights. That's the other message I want to leave you with here today. Think about the long game. I know in the short term, things look incredibly bleak right now. But if you're able to look beyond the trees, through the forest, I think that you will see that as precarious as the nation's situation is at the moment, that we should not despair. We should not give up hope. We should not embrace nihilism and say, forget it. It's time to just burn it all down. Because it's not. It's not. There are, again, a lot of stressors on our country. A lot of stressors on us as individuals. But there are also firewalls. There are checks and balances. And I continue to hope. I can't say I've got a lot of faith here, but I continue to hope that our elected officials will take some of those steps to try to de-escalate the tensions in our country, as opposed to adding fuel to the fire. So have a great rest of your Monday, at least as well as you can. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. But in the meantime, be well, be safe, and be free.